Hey everyone, welcome back to Pretending with Dice. As always, I'm your host AJ. We're back again today with another one of our interview episodes, and I'm super pleased to be joined for this one by Ed Spence, DM of Dungeon Manager and Fable Hunters. Thanks so much for joining me, Ed. How's it going?
Yeah, no. As well as can be expected under the circumstances, I guess. But yeah,
straight into it with with the situation.
With the situation, the event, But yeah, how about you? How are things?
Yeah, pretty good. As I say, as well as can be considered in the situation, really. As I say, we're very much kind of out of our January sort of break in programming again, which always seems to sort of happen unplanned. It seems that every January we roll around and it's like, okay, we're taking a break for a couple of weeks. Okay, yeah.
Well, we very similar. So we ended last year with a sort of a mid-season finale, and then we did a Christmas one shot, and then we were kind of like, we'll start recording again, like in the new year. We'll figure out, we're pretty big cliffhanger. We should probably resolve that at some point. And then it was only sort of a couple of weeks into January, we were like, oh man, there's a lot going on in the world right now. We should probably get around to recording again. But yeah.
That's pretty much how it's for me. It's sort of like, okay, yeah, we're getting to the end of December. I mean, we did I think the last one we did of the year was we do a world building bonus one every so often, because we've got our own custom sort of homebrew setting and that, and it was just like, yeah, we'll take a couple of weeks off. We might be back sort of first week of January and that. And then, it's 15th of January already. It's okay. Things are rolling along. But yeah, it seems to happen most years. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. But yeah, it's speeding up. I swear it is.
Well, I think it's also a part of it. Like, obviously last year was like a whole thing, but I feel like at the end of each year there is, and I say this as someone who's fairly new to certainly the podcasting and streaming scene, but I think regardless of what you're doing, whether it's to do with work, whether it's to do with social life or anything, there is like a certain amount of like new year, new me reevaluation. And I think, especially in the wake of everything that happened last year and kind of looking ahead to this one. And I think also it's probably fair to say, I don't know if you found this, but with so much stuff being I think there was a real upturn and uptick in the amount of content that was being produced by so many like great creatives last year, because being stuck at home, I think on one hand I think it can be really debilitating from a creative standpoint, because there does kind of come a point where you're there going like, but when there's so much other stuff going on in the world right now, it can be really hard to like focus in on the stuff that makes you really passionate about world building, about storytelling and stuff like that. And I think I realize I've started off this podcast just kind of rambling, and I apologize for that.
No. It's pretty par for the course. Yeah.
But I think like, especially after last year where so many people were creating so much great stuff, be that sort of podcasting about sort of the mechanics of different TTRPG systems, or campaigns, or one-shots, or kind of like interview episodes like this one. I think, especially with the amount that people were doing last year and creating quite a sizable base for themselves, sort of coming into a new year where you have accomplished so much and done so much in the way of basically creating. I think, coming into a new year and sort of not really knowing, after the uncertainty of the latter year and not really knowing when that uncertainty is going to end or if it will, I think, I think a month of reflection and looking ahead kind of is only natural.
For sure, yeah. I mean, for me, it was very much like, okay, I use the sort of the tick over as sort of like, okay, right, that's over and done with. That's 2020. We maybe didn't hit all of our goals, because it was probably my own hubris. Actually, it's me. I caused this. At the start of 2020, I put out a video of like, here's what we're doing this year. Here's all the cool things we got planned, and we didn't do most of them. So I kind of was a bit hesitant about doing that again, mainly because most of the things I could pretty much just change one of the labels on that video and be like, oh no, here's the 2021 video. but yeah, I mean, I kind of looked at it as a sort of opportunity to go like, okay, so what do I want to do this year moving forward? We've kind of, I'm happy with what we put out last year. We didn't hit most of the things that I originally had planned, but like I feel like a lot of, like most of the world, maybe had to abandon some plans or change what I had going on, and that that's no big deal. But looking forward, where do I go from here? Is a sort of thing of like, okay, now we've got another year. What are we doing? Is sort of how I've kind of looked at it this month. And
exactly, I watched a great video recently about New Year's resolutions, and it was kind of going like resolutions. There's such or aims for a year, like going, I'm going to learn a language this year. I'm going to do, I'm going to quit this thing. I'm going to start running or something like that. Like, I think one of the things that this video brought up, which I thought was really interesting, and I hadn't really considered it before, but the trouble is with that, because we tend to set ourselves so many goals throughout the year, and a year is a long time as well. It passes quickly, but it's a long time, and there's no accounting for what is going to happen in those entire 12 months. But if you're going, I'm going to start running, I'm going to finish that book, I'm going to... Inevitably, if you have days where you stumble, because no matter how dedicated someone is, like, it is so hard to keep up that kind of momentum through any year, let alone a year where you're experiencing sort of internationally shared trauma. But one of the things that this video said was, something to potentially do instead, rather than ascribing yourself goals or resolutions, is to ascribe yourself a theme for the year. So this is going to be, and it can be as broad and all-encompassing as possible, but for example, ascribe yourself like, this will be the year of reading. And so you go, okay, I'm going to read more this year. And you may discover throughout the year that, just because you're busy, reading a book every month or every other week might not be conducive to either your health or your working, and so maybe you find like audiobooks are better for you, and that can still fall under the remit of which I thought was, as someone who tends to put a lot of pressure on themselves, like I found that quite useful, and also quite reassuring as well.
Yeah, to sort of not seeing it as a failure if you don't hit like you say, a book a month, 12 books, what can still feel like a similar kind of accomplishment. It doesn't, just because you haven't picked up 10 hardcover books doesn't mean you've not hit your goal, sort of thing. You've made an attempt to you've made an attempt. You've had a goal for change, and you've done your best, and that's better than not doing anything. I think is the way I kind of look at it. It's like, well, if I did nothing, then that's nothing, but at least I've got all these unfinished projects. That's probably not psychologically healthy either, to be honest, but yeah. I get what you mean though. 100%. It's so anyway, then, I mean, I kind of always try and start these interviews a sort of similar way, and that's to ask you to sort of give a rundown of what Dungeon Manager and Fable Hunters is kind of all about for our listeners who might not be familiar with them.
Yeah, so Dungeon Manager sort of started accidentally. It's the first thing I've ever DM'd. It's been going... we've been recording just over a year now, I think. And yeah, basically it started off a small group of us, just a bunch of friends, a couple who had never played D&D before, myself who had never DM'd before. And it started with us just kind of sitting around on our living room floor, just playing this homebrew campaign. And we're sort of fairly eclectic. Myself, I'm an actor. My partner, who's also in the group, she's a director. We have a couple of writers in the group, a cinematographer. And so it was never our intention to make something that would be shared. It was kind of initially just our thing. And, as someone who, is their first time DMing as well, like there was it was the furthest thing from the front of my mind that, I wanted to share, the embarrassment of my different voices and my lack of knowledge of the rules with a wider audience. But I remember after our very first session, which was this sort of chaotic, everyone out for themselves, sort of, there were like cannons being flung in the air and like explosions and trees on fire and all this kind of stuff. And it was so much fun. And I remember at the end of the session, we kind of joked, "Oh man, it would have been great to record that." Ha 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 ha. And we continued for around a year of playing, just kind of meeting irregularly, as I'm sure every D&D group is very familiar with. Scheduling was always an issue. But
it's almost a meme at this point, isn't it? Of like, everybody can do Saturday, and then the last person comes in and goes, "Saturday's not good for me."
I know, and weirdly, like that doesn't change when you're recording. But yeah, it's sort of around a year in, we were still playing with these characters, and we'd had such lived-in experiences with them, and especially for the two players, Billy and Diani, who hadn't played before, they were, so swept up in this system and the story that we were telling together. And throughout it, we kept on kind of joking, like, every so often, especially with Billy being a cinematographer and having like so much equipment, every so often we were like, "Oh man, we should get like a camera in here," and stuff like that. And then eventually we were like, I mean, we could bring a camera in here. So we sort of were like, well, we'll try, try it out as an experiment, but ultimately our enjoyment comes first. It's about, that we want to share this story with people, and if this isn't the right way to tell this story, then we can consider it an experiment tried and an experiment abandoned. And yeah, we set up the cameras and just started going, and like I say, like, majority of the group don't consider themselves performers, and one of the things I was very clear with everyone was, if this gets in the way of role playing or your enjoyment of the story or whatever, like, we don't have to do it. But everyone, I think, was quite keen to, which was, I don't know, I think it was as much about the story as our dynamic, because I think before we came sort of into the TTRPG community, I think a lot of the examples that you see of actual plays tend to be very polished, very basically professionals. You look at things like Critical Role and High Rollers and all the stuff that comes out of Wizards of the Coast and stuff like that, and it's all people. It's their job to perform, and it's their job to basically present a story. And I think one of the things that was really nice was, while I like to think there's, a good amount of quality behind what we do, and a lot of that, in fact, I would argue most of that is down to Billy and his filming and the way in which he presents everything in the final edit. At the same time, like, part of what we wanted to share was the fun that we were just having sat around a table. And yeah, it sort of all came out of that, and then eventually we started making podcast versions of our episodes, and we were approached and ended up being hosted by Wizards of the Coast for a time as well, which was wild, actually.
I remember pretty huge.
Yeah, well, I remember getting the notification on Twitter where Dungeons and Dragons follows you, and I was like, oh, that's that's weird. But yeah, I mean, ultimately it sort of came down to just kind of wanting to share the fun that we were having sat around a table and just doing silly voices and telling this increasingly sort of grandiose story with other people, just in the hope that other people would enjoy it. And then off the back of that, I have no idea how they came upon us, but basically Fable Hunters, who are a group of various Twitch streamers who perform live each week, they messaged me out of the blue and said, "Look, we've seen you DM for Dungeon Manager. Would you like to DM for us as well?" And I'll admit, initially, because I'm sure you probably get this and a lot of other DMs as well, but like planning for a session can like take a lot out of you, and especially when there is also that pressure to put something out to an audience, and it's not just you and your friends. It is like in the case of Fable Hunters, it was a weekly live event with quite a large built-in audience, and part of me was like, I don't know if I will have the time for that. I don't know if I'll be able to commit to 2 regular, quite long-form campaigns, but we did one shot together, just to kind of test the waters, and they're amazing. They're such great role players and such great performers and communicators, and sort of on the basis of that, I was like, nah, I think I have to do this. I think I have to. And so what ended up happening was, I think they'd had a D&D campaign previously, which had been based on Lost Mines of Fandalva. Yeah. And I think they were looking for something a little different. And I think because though our Dungeon Manager campaign is set in Faerun, it's homebrew, but it's still based along the Sword Coast. It's still like Waterdeep, Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter, all that kind of stuff.
Familiar locations and such.
Yeah, and I think I was very keen to stretch myself and create something entirely new. And so I basically said to them, how would you feel about and this is probably because I was watching a lot of Castlevania at the time, but and reading a lot of Mordheim. But I sort of approached them and said, well, how would you feel about homebrew setting, sort of very gothic, lots of werewolves and witches and vampires and fog and grey skies? And they were like, yeah, we would like that, please. So yeah, and we've been going for a couple of months now, I think. But yeah, anyway, sorry, that was a very, very long and rambling.
No, it's great. Yeah, no, I feel like that's a very comprehensive rundown of it. I mean, you're kind of the first person we've had on for these interviews that's more sort of Twitch focused and then podcasted from the Twitch, if that makes sense, rather than most of the ones we've had are sort of podcasters who've later maybe started broadcasting on Twitch as well. So it's interesting to sort of hear the perspective of sort of how that comes together, kind of thing. I mean, us personally here, I mean, there's such I feel like another sort of peek behind our curtain is our sessions are quite sporadic. I mean, and going back to the whole sort of organising a regular session thing, that I don't feel like we'd be able to personally put together a regular session. So my hat's off to you for being able to sort of do that on such a regular basis, especially like you say, a weekly basis with Fable Hunters. So yeah, it's a different mindset, I'd imagine, than the yeah.
Well, it's a strange one because so we started out putting out content on YouTube. Twitch was quite far away from us because there was kind of that added element of Twitch chat and being present and like communicating with an audience, which I really love. And I really love, in our relatively short time in the role-playing community, one of the things that has been incredible to watch is just how tight that community is. Like everyone seems to know everyone, or at the very least support one another, and it's incredible to watch. And I think it's one of the things that has really kept us going, especially through lockdown last year, when we were kind of craving that escapism and these different stories. But we started out putting things on YouTube, and then a lot of the people that we were communicating with over Twitter were podcasts that either we weren't familiar or that we were already fans of, like Flintlocks and Fireballs. I'm a huge fan, and but finally being able to like communicate with a lot of these individuals, we realized, well, actually, there's a lovely podcasting community out there, and maybe we can sort of be a part of that and see like how that works. And so we started incorporating that into the content that we're producing. And then it was only really through because we did so Wizards of the Coast promoted a couple of one-shots that we were doing in conjunction with their book releases. So we did a Theros one-shot, we did an Icewind Dale 3-parter, and it was only really from that we were like, well, is there any scope for a partnership on our main campaign? And they said, well, yes, but only if it was through Twitch. So we then had to have that conversation of, well, do we want to commit to Twitch? It's kind of even now, like, it's still kind of an unknown minefield to us, and we're still figuring out a lot of stuff about like how to make the most of it and how to basically make the most of being on there. But after having that conversation and thinking about how we could potentially restructure the way we put out episodes, it sort of became the driving force behind what we were doing. And we pre-record all of our episodes, partly because of the scheduling aspect of it. So what we do, we meet every other week on a Sunday, and we record 2 episodes, and then we space those episodes out over the next couple of weeks. So we give ourselves basically a week off in between, which means, a lot of us are very busy. Like Billy, bless him, has 101 projects on his plate at any given time. He's a very busy man, and he's incredible, and I love him dearly. But in terms of fitting it around, it became much easier. And so I think with Fable Hunters especially, that was one of the things that weighed on my mind was, with it not only being weekly, but also it wasn't even pre-recorded, it was live. It was a different kind of challenge that, I don't know, not one that I was necessarily scared of, because I think so I'm an actor mainly, and so performing on stage to a live audience isn't something that, I mean, it's terrifying, obviously.
But it's something that you're sort of doing, though, so it's not a million miles away from streaming to an audience.
Yeah, precisely. But I think, going, okay, for the foreseeable future, like, this is my weekly commitment, and I'm, like I say, sort of a couple of months in now, and I can't imagine doing anything else. It's amazing. And, and you get such different things from the people that you're playing with. And it's really interesting because in one, I'm playing with people that I've known for a very long time and who are very near and dear friends to me. And on the other hand, I'm playing with people who are very new to me, but have such a different, I guess, sort of skill set in terms of like streaming is their job. Like they're full-time streamers. And, that's something that, I'm still kind of coming to grips with streaming as like I only found out what POG means the other day. I was like,
I don't think I'm there yet. I don't think I see it used a lot, and I feel very old.
Yeah, no, me too. I came into this group, and we have like our own separate Discord set up to like communicate about like scheduling and sessions and all that kind of stuff. And every so often, like when we were looking at character artwork and stuff, and it was being sent through, and they were like, "Oh, POG," and I was like, "Oh, I don't know what that means, but it's fine."
It's context clues. It sounds like a good thing, I guess.
Yeah. But yeah, I've tried not to like sort of use it myself, because it feels a little too much like Steve Buscemi going, "What is up, fellow kids?" But
yeah. I mean, it sounds to me so. The dungeon manager stuff, you said you pre-recorded, so that's at least it's a bit of a different set of muscles, I would guess, then, to sort of have that sort of safety net of being able to be like, well, at least we can slightly edit this, as opposed to the Fable Hunters. It's like, oh, it's going out live, no any mistakes are out there, sort of thing. Well, not mistakes, but you know what I mean. Once it's said, it's out of your hands, kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. And with Dungeon Manager, like one of the benefits is that we're able to, so we have some incredible original music by Peter Flint, who I highly recommend checking out. But he composed all of our music. And one of the lovely things is, while we play it in-game, so we use Roll20, so we can see maps and music and all that kind of stuff. One of the nice things is we have a bank of music and sound effects that we can add in afterwards. And I think especially for podcast listeners, I think one of the nice things is that does help with the immersion as much as it helps the immersion of the players. I think, especially when you're listening to something that is essentially audio drama.
Yeah.
It does help to sort of like, if you've got my weird nasally voice going, now you're going into a cave, and to then have like those sound effects and Pete's like incredible score going in the background, like it does give us that freedom to, I guess, be a little more cinematic with it.
I mean, I definitely, that was something that I thought of fairly early on with ours. Was I'm quite aware that my voice can, over the course of, we're talking for an hour, if I'm DMing the whole time, I'm fairly happy with how I sound, but like there's so much more that could be added with music and sound effects. So, I mean, I think it was after our first storyline I started looking into doing that on ours, and it's, I've heard nothing but good things from our listeners saying, the music was great, it really added so much to this and things. So yeah, it's just that other element, and I'm 100% with you with the, it's basically audio drama kind of thing.
Yeah, because I think that's, ultimately, it's to do with the people who are playing, but people stick around, I think, for certainly long-term campaigns because they're invested in the story. And I think, if you're doing as much as you can to make that as immersive, because, for better or worse, when you are putting something out onto the internet or into the world, ultimately, like, you do have to bear in mind things like, you're not just doing in-jokes with one another, you are also providing a story for people who don't know you, who don't know your lives. And one of the things we're very aware of, we started recording halfway through our story, and what we did was we said to ourselves, well, we'll make sure that it starts at a good jumping on point, but we are going to have to be aware we know certain things about this story that our listeners will not, or our viewers will not, and we'll have to occasionally, if something comes up, like in-game, in character, might have to go, oh, yes, like that, we met that person. Remember when we met that person? We did this thing with them. I think it is interesting because I think when obviously we're not sat around a table so much anymore, but when you are sat around a table and you are willing up a world with one another. And I think I've said this before, but I think one of the things that I really love about, not just D&D, but kind of any role-playing game, is I think it really harkens back to when you're a kid. Because I remember when my partner first came back to my childhood home, and I remember taking her around and like showing her like different trees and stuff, and I was like, yeah, that was my den, and that used to be a rocket ship and all this kind of stuff. And as a kid, like, you run around and you play and you imagine and you conjure things into being, and you're like, right, let's go climb that tower, as you point at the tree. And in that moment, like, no one has any doubt that it's a tower. It is a tower, and you're going to climb it, and there will be, gold at the top or whatever. And I think as we get older, like, there's less cause for that. And I think one of the lovely things about role-playing games is, you say you walk into a room and it is dank and covered in cobwebs, and iron sconces hang from the wall, and everyone is conjuring up something very different in their minds, but somehow it's creating something tangible in the middle of the table. And I've already forgotten where I was going with this. But basically, I think, one of the lovely things about that experience is it is incredibly personal, and everyone gets something different out of it.
Yeah.
But the moment you're putting that out into the world and sharing that with people, like, you are creating something tangible together with other people. So anything that is being described, to, a third party that is not sat around your gaming table, it has to be as engaging for them as it is for you, because otherwise, why put it out there, I guess.
Yeah, I'm always very conscious of the fact that, we're playing a game and we're all having fun. We're all, playing the game, but this is not just for us. We're putting a show together as well, so it needs to be engaging as we're playing. And I mean, obviously, I say music and sound effects helps with that, but nobody wants to sit around and listen to us reel off, numbers for an hour as we're constantly rolling dice, sort of thing. That's not why, as you say, that's not why people stick around. They stick around because they engage with the characters, they like the players or whatever. I mean, I've always been more of a kind of role play rather than combat sort of focus, just in terms of what I enjoy when I'm playing anyway. But I think when it comes to sort of podcasting, as I say, nobody's listening for the dice rolls, really. They're invested in what the dice rolls represent, but yeah, they're there for the investment, like I say. That's yeah.
Because how did you get into role playing in the first place? I know this is probably
Well, I mean, role playing is sort of a bit of a long road. I mean, how far back do we want to go? I mean, you talk about, like, say, the childhood tree, and I'm with you on that. And that, not so. I mean, we moved around a little bit, so I haven't really got so much a singular childhood home. But I was always kind of writing my own stories and things, and had kind of little characters and stuff. And then later on, sort of game wise, came into, I did a lot of did a fair amount of games workshops of Warhammer stuff when I was starting from when I was about 11 or 12.
And me too.
But I didn't really get into kind of role playing itself until, I guess I was sort of, I don't know how old I was, early to mid 20s kind of thing. And I kept sort of seeing things online and sort of like, there's a Star Wars role playing game. Oh, there's D&D is this and that. And basically I just kind of looked at the Star Wars one and went, I want to play that. I have nobody at all I know who will play it with me, so I'll just buy the books. And I had all the books for a while, and I was like, right, okay, well, I've spent all this money now. I might as well start, sort of thing. So that was kind of, and then I just sort of roped in a bunch of people who hadn't played before, and was like, we're doing this, come over to my house at this time. And that was kind of how we started, really. And then branching off from Star Wars into other games, really. But yeah, that was... that was kind of how we came to that. At that point, I was already actually podcasting, though. Not this podcast. Really? It was more sort of kind of general sort of pop culture discussion sort of thing. So yeah, it sort of, and then it came together after that one ended into like, well, I want to keep playing D&D and I want to keep podcasting. So just jam them together and see who will listen.
Yeah,
sort of thing. That's awesome. Yeah, and but again, yeah, even going back to, like, say, sort of writing little stories and things when I was younger, that was always more sort of like, oh no, what would be a cool sort of thing, and that, and then being able to then share that with people is very much like it's a fun element of, that's partly why I end up always being the DM. Is like, oh, I've got this story idea that I want to run, so I guess I'm running it, kind of thing,
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like I started as a player, and I remember the moment we started our Dungeon Manager campaign, and like I say, first time I DM'd, but I remember suddenly, like, a game and a medium of storytelling that I really enjoyed suddenly clicked. Like I already really enjoyed playing, and I really enjoyed that role playing aspect because, ultimately, in a similar way, without sounding too depressing, like I act because I like this is going to sound very dark. I like certainly when I was younger, I liked not being myself.
Right.
And I think that's extended to I enjoy inhabiting or understanding other people, and I think role playing is such a great doorway into that, is telling stories and understanding, because I think it's probably why we've seen such a resurgence of it recently, is you don't need anything for it. You don't need anything except for maybe some pen and some paper and dice. Like, let's be honest, at the best of times, you probably don't even need any fixed rules. But I think it's so, like, it feels like such a holdover from, I don't know, I don't want to get too, like, kids these days, but it is so nice to do something that has no reliance on screens. Yeah. He says, fully aware of the irony that recording, like, but we're
surrounded by screens of that. Yeah, whenever we're playing. But
but I think there is something really lovely about, like, because it is kind of harkening back to like telling stories around like a campfire and stuff like that. Like it's just communal storytelling, which I think is so lovely. And I think you're right. Like a lot of the time, you know, you can end up DMing because you're like, I really want this to happen. And I mean, I kind of had the opposite thing where I was kind of strong-armed into DMing because when I first met my partner, she had been playing in a group for a while, and she said to me, "Oh, do you want to come along and play a game?" And like, sort of very similar to you, like I grew up sort of doodling in my school workbooks and reading a lot of fantasy and like absorbing Lord of the Rings on a regular basis and painting sort of Warhammer fantasy and 40k and all that kind of stuff, and sort of having such a love of these sort of more fantastical worlds, and so D&D had been something that I'd always been aware of, but it always seemed so inaccessible to me, because it seemed like, oh, it was a thing that people played in their basements in the 80s, and that was kind of my extent of it. But you know, it's such a part of the, like, everyone knows what Dungeons and Dragons is. Everyone has heard of Dungeons and Dragons, and so to a certain extent, like, I was always aware of it. And theoretically, I was always kind of like, that sounds like the kind of thing I would love, because it's fancy and it's telling stories and it's pretending to be other people. But I just never knew like how you would even begin to get into it. And so when my partner said, you know, come along and play, and I did, and I remember coming out of it and going, wow, like I didn't know I needed that. I didn't know like I needed this kind of game.
Yeah.
And so we were playing for a little while, and I remember I sent this backstory to our DM, and it was just reams and reams and reams, and I sent him a message beforehand saying, I'm so sorry. I just really I really love this kind of stuff. And he kind of just sent me a message back saying, have you ever thought of DMing? And I was like, I mean, I barely know how the game works. And then between him and Catherine, my partner, they were both like, you should DM. You should absolutely DM. I think you'd really enjoy it, and you'd be good at it. And while I still dispute that final suggestion, eventually I was like, okay, yeah, no, I'll give it a go. And yeah, like I said earlier, I think it really clicked. And I think, for as much as I enjoy playing, I think there's a really lovely feeling and satisfaction about, it's not even holding all the cards, because I think as a DM you don't. I don't think you can ever. I think it's the kind of game where if your aim is to know everything, I think you're maybe not playing it wrong. I think that's maybe,
it's too much like a railroad at that point, isn't it? You're better off writing a novel, sort of thing. Yeah,
exactly. I think one of the things I love is consistently being surprised by players, and being able to tee that up. I think that's more it. It's less going, this is my story and I want to tell this story. For me, anyway, I think that is a valid way of playing, and you know, I've played in some games where that has been the case, but I think for me, it's kind of meticulously planning a sandbox and then saying, okay, how do you want to play in this sandbox?
Yeah. And
then one of them reaches into the sand and goes, I found this diamond. And you're like, I didn't bury that diamond there, but it's so sparkly and I want to find out why that diamond is in my sandbox.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, especially when you're in a group that trusts each other and feels safe with one another as well, I think because role-playing is an incredibly vulnerable thing to do, because ultimately, for as much as you're portraying someone else, you are imbuing that individual with a kind of shared life experience. Like, you're drawing on yourself to bring this character to life. And I think when you're in a group that trusts one another and that sort of, you know, without overstating it, like has a real love for one another and wants to see these stories and these characters through, I think for me, it's it's kind of more about facilitating that. I really love facilitating that. But
I think I come at that from a similar sort of angle to you. That I mean, I don't, you know, there's a million different ways to run a game in that, but I'm very much like you say. I like setting, you know, having a story in my head, like, well, not so much a story, but like an idea of events that might occur, but then just putting the first one in front of them and going, right, okay, what do you want to do, sort of thing. You know your characters, you know, because they, as you say. You got to trust your players to know that you got to trust your players that they know what they're playing enough, and say, okay, here's what's happening now. How are you going to react? Rather than going, so this is happening. What do you do? Okay, so we're still on the railroad. You know, nothing as a player, because I occasionally play as well. Nothing takes me out of it faster than being railroaded.
Yeah, because I think at a certain point, like, and you know, I think. And it's something that I've struggled with as a DM as we've done one-shots, because, you know, with a one-shot, there is kind of an element, especially when it's something that you are releasing, there is kind of an element of going, I mean, it does need to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It needs to have a story. And so I think with a one-shot, one of the things I've struggled with, because I think it does go against my personal preferences, is when you're like, okay, this thing has to happen because otherwise the story doesn't work. But at the same time, still being open to the notion of, I mean, if it doesn't go that way, like, that's fine. Like, you can absolutely improvise your way out of it. Also, sorry, this is going in a completely different direction, but I'm just really interested. You mentioned, like, one of your first games was Star Wars roleplay. So did you say you ran that, or you played in it?
Well, I ran it. I mean, it wasn't the Fantasy Flight Edge of the Empire current one. That hadn't quite come out yet when we started. It was then out of print, Wizards of the Coast Star Wars Saga Edition. And I bought the core rulebook and I was like, this looks cool. Mainly because I was, you know, huge into Star Wars. And I was like, ooh, this scratches my nerdy thing on, you know, nerdy brain in multiple different angles. And it was a very quick realization that I don't know anybody who even runs D&D. Nobody is going to run this.
Yeah.
I really want to play this. So I feel like I'm going to have to run it, essentially.
Yeah.
And then at that point, it was a matter of convincing a bunch of people who also hadn't ever played these type of games to be like, no, I want you to come over my house and pretend to be like Wookiees and stuff. And
I mean, in terms of roleplay, that would be so easy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not
occasionally growl.
I mean, that campaign, I mean, it had its share of, like, looking back, quite cringe-worthy sort of first gaming group sort of things that, like, I definitely wouldn't put it out as a podcast kind of thing of like, oh, this is, and you know. Some of them on my hand, not to throw anyone under the bus. Some of them not my fault. But you know, it's a first game group kind of thing. But it was a fun time, you know, and it definitely was a bit of a crash course in kind of DMing just as a thing that you do, because, you know, I went into it with a whole load of prep, and then 20 minutes into the first session, immediately that was like, oh no, they're not doing what I thought they would do. What is going to happen now? Kind of thing. And then trying to roll with it, and so it was a very quick lesson in, like, nothing survives contact with the players and stuff. So it was it was a fun time sort of thing.
Because I'm interested, like, how. Because I know a lot of people who like to run pre-written adventures, and kind of I'm interested, I guess, on your take, because one of the things I found initially, when I was about to start DMing, as many do, I'm sure, I looked at Lost Mines of Fandalva, and I was like, okay, maybe I should run this. And I did end up, like, running a couple of, like, informal sessions with the DM, who Michael, who's also in Dungeon Manager, Catherine, and her then housemate Jess, who is also in Dungeon Manager. So that was kind of the beginnings of it. But I really struggled with, and, like, you know, it's a really simple, really, like, tightly written adventure. But one of the things I really struggled with was working within the parameters of something that had already been written, because I felt it was too. like envisioning stuff going off the rails. I was like, but I only know the information that has been given to me by this book. I only know that there are like 5 goblins around that corner. I only know that there's this blacksmith called Fern. It's where, and so very quickly, I think I realized I think I can only do this if it's a story that I have laid the groundwork for, because I know everything that's going on in that world. And certainly with Fable Hunters, one of the things I found really freeing was in creating this homebrew setting. Like, I know the history of this world. Like, I don't have to go and look it up. I don't have to like figure out like what the trade routes are between Neverwinter and Waterdeep. I don't have to decide on like how many guilds there are, and like I already know that kind of stuff. And I guess one of the things I'm interested, especially as you sort of DM more, like, do you have a preference or one that you steer clear of? Or?
Oh, I mean, I 100% prefer homebrewing, really. When it comes to that, I don't know whether maybe again it's me coming at it. That's a similar sort of view to yourself as kind of let's see what the players do with this sort of thing. But I do tend to bounce off of pre-written adventures. I really do. But when we first switched to, I had this was after the Star Wars group. I started running D&D 5th edition. We started with, we didn't do Lost Minds of Fandover, although I did kind of read it through, and I think at that point, I think the McElroys had started doing Adventure Zone, so I'd kind of listened to the first few episodes of that was them doing that, and then quickly deviating into their own thing.
Very quickly.
But so I kind of had an idea of it, and that. But we started with the second, Horde of the Dragon Queen, I think it was the pre-written thing. We did that for a couple of sessions, doing the first couple of chapters, and I immediately was like, I'm bouncing off of this, and the similar sort of thing as you, like I only know what's in the book here.
It's a bit too much like revision.
Well. It was like, well, I kept feeling like, well, I need to keep referring to the book when I could just be doing my own thing.
All of this stuff.
And this was coming off of running that Star Wars game 100% homebrew for like 2.5, 3 years almost. So I think we ran, I can't remember exactly, maybe the first 3 chapters of that book, and then I was like, how would you guys feel if we just deviated and we did our own thing? And they were like, yeah, sure, whatever. So I was like, okay, first things first, we're no longer in the Forgotten Realms. Here's a giant A1 piece of paper that I've drawn a map on, which has since, like, and I've got a photo of it on my computer. It's real basic. It's like a coast outline and like 3 towns. And that's since evolved into our full photo satellite view map that we've got on our World Anvil page of like hundreds of settlements and things. And I don't sleep enough, basically, is what I'm saying.
I understand entirely.
Yeah, but yeah, no, like I say, I was a similar sort of view to you. I mean, I 100%. I mean, this is probably why anytime I've tried to run a one shot on the podcast, even though those have also been homebrewed and that, I can't do it in one because I'm too happy to, if the players say, "Oh, well, I want to do this," I'm more interested in them going, "Well, let's see where this goes," rather than sticking to a sort of pre-written thing. It doesn't. I don't know. I just can't gel with it, if you know what I mean. If them say, "Oh, well, no, this says you need to be going to the next room here," or "No, now you need to go off and find this person." It's like, well, it just doesn't work for me. I'm 100%. As I say, respect that. Some people really do prefer pre-written stuff, and that is 100% a way to play. And I haven't got any problem with that at all. But it just doesn't work so well for me. That's how I look at it, basically.
No, I think I agree. I think, like you say, it's, and I'm sure this isn't the case, but I think when it is entirely coming from the group, and like you say, I think it's very easy to take elements from. Like I remember when we did our Icewind Dale 3-parter. Like there are a lot of things that I appropriated from Rime of the Frost Maiden, but it was all in service of something that came from the players. I mean, my jumping off point as a DM is to kind of, basically this is longhand for me saying I'm very bad at coming up with ideas. But basically, because I'm anything that we do, be it a one-shot or a long-form campaign, I want it to tie in either thematically or narratively with whatever the characters have. So what I tend to do is, my jumping off point is basically approaching the players and saying, what kind of campaign would you like? Or going, this. So for example, our Christmas one, I said, I'm thinking we'll do a Victorian-esque style ghost story in the vein of like Dickens. So if you want to create a character for that and send me some backstory for that, we'll be playing at this level, and I'll get something more concrete written up. So one of the things I really enjoy is sort of getting those backstories from characters. And I always say, give me, I'll send like some pre-written questions to them, and I'll say, give me your backstory and give me one secret. Give me a secret that you don't want any of the other players to know. And then kind of from that, I'll receive these, incredibly written documents that are, funny and sad and just transporting. And it's so great to just sit down and read it, and immediately you start to see parallels between, I have 5 players, so there's crossover there, and I'm like, okay, that thing can connect to this, and we can tie that in thematically with this later on, and we can mirror that, and we can drive a wedge between these 2 characters later on with the introduction of this NPC, all this kind of stuff. And I think there's something really exciting about it coming entirely from the players, which, like I say, may just be an admittance of my own lack of imagination. But
I think it all adds to the texture, because in a non-spoilery way, because we haven't really, we're still in the midst of it. Our current sort of D&D campaign, which unfortunately we've had to sort of put a hold on recordings due to the situation. Especially in the last episode before we sort of went on hiatus, there's a whole section there that if Liam hadn't sort of given me sort of the admittedly slightly vague thing of like, my guy doesn't really know where he came from, I was able to then, we were able to put a whole sort of couple of scenes in where I could sort of, even without revealing any secrets to him, be like, hey, here's some breadcrumbs sort of thing. And it was part of my, if anything, my favourite sort of part of that episode was like, hey, I ended up, again, no spoilers because it's the title of the episode, but he had ended up having like a sort of vision type thing. And that's 100% from him being like, well, my guy's this kind of person, he doesn't know this, so I'm able to sort of build off of that. And that's my favourite stuff, is being like, oh, okay, cool, you've given me some stuff to work with here, rather than trying to jam a character into events that I'd already thought of. I'd rather have like the thing, me running it, reacting to what they're giving me, rather than going, okay, here's an unchangeable thing, what do you do in response to it? I
think it's also like one of the things that's really interesting and I really enjoy in our group is we have a lot of moral arguments, or at least the characters do, and it became very apparent that was going to be happening a lot early on, because as with a lot of D&D characters, like a lot of them don't have a very happy upbringing. Otherwise, why would they be running around and adventuring? But naturally, a lot of them have a lot of like issues with parents and things like that. And so one of the first arcs, I guess, with the group that we did, it sort of ended with this. Basically, bodies had been going missing, and they eventually found out that someone was putting together a flesh golem trying to bring the father of the house back to life. And they defeated the flesh golem, and they found the culprit, and they were like, right, we're going to take them to the City Watch. Let's just check the house, make sure we've not missed anything or anyone. And they went upstairs and they found this 5-year-old girl, and they were like, oh, okay. And so it became this moral conversation of, they desecrated bodies, like, we can't let that slide. And then that was one half of the group, and then the other half of the group who like understood what it was to not have parents around and stuff like that, were going, but there's a child who is going to be out on the streets. That's just the way it works in this world. There isn't like social services or anything like that. Like, we are leaving a child like parentless. And how do we reconcile that? And I remember we got to the end of that episode, and it was actually, no, this was before we started recording. And I remember it got so heated and this was our final session of the year, and we came to a close of the session. And I remember we just kind of sat there in silence for a minute, and I was like, okay, well, I guess we'll pick this up next year. And it was so heated and emotional and genuine. And that was all because everyone had invested so much in, well, how would my character react to this? How would my character want, the closest thing to justice in this world? How would they want that to be enacted? And I think, I don't know, what my favorite moments as a DM aren't when, you're putting something like cool in front of them and going, here's this monster you can fight or whatever. It's sitting back for a solid half hour and just watching kind of in awe as your players just bounce off one another, either in conflict or in union. And yeah, I think there's something really lovely and exciting. And I think it's an experience you can't really get from anything else. I know you could, there are a lot of incredible video games which offer, seemingly unlimited choices, but ultimately, they are restricted by code and algorithms and programming. Whereas with something like any role-playing game, the only limits that you impose are the boundaries that you set for one another, going, I don't want to explore this subject. Okay, we won't. I don't want this session to be any longer than 3 hours. Okay, it won't be. It's entirely based upon the boundaries that you set with one another, because outside of that, it's impossible storytelling and it's boundless. And I think, it's so unlike anything else. It's like you are collectively telling your favorite TV series, and none of you have any idea how it's going to end. And yeah, no, it's I feel very fortunate to have, over the last, only really 3 or 4 years, have kind of discovered this, these games, but also this community. I feel I feel very fortunate.
So with the night of sort of bringing this train into the station, then I feel like that's a nice button to sort of kind of pull this to a close on. Then where can people find you and all your stuff?
A lot of places. So as with most of my answers, it will be a bit rambling, but bear with me. So you can find us on Twitch at dungeonmanager_D&D. We have new episodes out every Wednesday at 5:00 GMT, and we will be picking up on our mid-season finale on, I believe it's the 3rd of February. Let me just check.
I think that might have gone by the time this episode is going to go live.
Okay, in which case we are already resumed. And
I have my calendar app closed at the moment, so that doesn't ding and interfere with the recording. But I believe that will have gone by the time this goes up. But
that's right. In which case,
people should definitely go back into the archives go and check that out though. Yeah.
I like that. I like the archives. But you can also catch up on all of our old content on YouTube. It has all of our recorded episodes, including all of our one-shots as well. You can check us out in podcast form on iTunes, Spotify, and Podbean. And we're also available. You can check out our Patreon as well. I always forget to plug that, but we do have a Patreon. We have lots of lovely stuff like maps from our sessions, which you can utilize in your games. We have stat blocks for homebrew monsters and homebrew NPCs, and lots of lore and backstory and all that kind of stuff written up for them. So you can check that out if you'd like to support us. In terms of my work on Fable Hunters, we stream every Thursday. That's at 6 o'clock, I think. You can find them on Twitter. You can find Fable Hunters on Twitter. I believe their old episodes are also on YouTube, I believe under the YouTube name Cantrip Breakers, which is the show that I DM for. And you can find me on Twitter at Edward_Spence_, where I don't really post all that much. There's not a lot of acting work going on in the lockdown, but I occasionally post pictures of cats and occasionally damning indictments of the Tory government. But yes, so that's
both of which are relevant to my interests.
But yeah, so that's me. I hope I haven't gone on for too long.
No, it's great. This has been a very interesting discussion today. Thanks so much again for joining me.
No, thank you.
I will close this out by ramblingly also giving out our details to our listeners. As always, you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, all three of which we're at Pretend with Dice. I swear I will remember to post on Instagram again very soon.
I always forget as well.
It's always the third one. It's like, I've got to Photoshop up a picture and stuff. And I'll get back to it. It's fine. Yeah. And also, if you're so inclined, we have a Ko-Fi page. It's a Ko-Fi Coffee. I always ask this every time.
Me too.
It's ko-fi.com/pretendingwithdice. And finally, we'd love for you all to join our Discord server, the links to which can be found in our Twitter bio and on the contact page of our Podbean site. A lot of fun stuff going on there. We're still doing our weekly Jackbox Games sessions on Saturdays, and I tend to generally post announcements and stuff on there first, and mostly, though, it's a place to post stupid memes. So, come and join us. But yeah, like I say, once again, thank you so much for joining me, Ed. This has been a lot of fun.
No, not a problem. If you're ever running a Star Wars campaign, let me know.
Well, we are planning on bringing back. We did one season of Star Wars, which we called Tempest Squadron, which was kind of my experiment to see how close we could get to being audio drama while still holding on to a slight bit of gameplay kind of thing. So I ended up revoicing basically every NPC with people we knew and stuff after the fact and things. That's awesome. But yeah, definitely I will keep you in the loop on that, because we are planning on coming back for season 2. So
nice. Yeah. I mean, I'm good at haughty Imperial officers.
Oh, so, that's good, because there's probably going to be a few. So. Cool. Okay. Well, in that case, then, talking is hard.
Talking is hard. Yeah.
So we will see you all next time, and see you later.
See you soon.